Oh, no. Can everyone, if
There's something in between.
if we keep this on, can everyone see okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's all or nothing.
All right, now I'm just figuring out. So I guess I need to sit down, is what I was told. So my name is Lori Hauber, and I am a staff attorney at Lane County Legal Aid, also referred to as Oregon Law Center. We're a statewide network of nonprofit, public interest law firm, and we do a range of work. My focus is on housing and, by extension, homelessness. So that's how I got involved. And I've been participating in the work group for over a year and a half. And so this issue was something that the work group had discussed. And obviously, unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know there was this longer history that Jennifer Fremser spoke about. But so some of why I decided to do this is I was active and I went to Camp 99 when it existed often, and just hearing stories, not just at Camp 99, but talking to other advocates, other people who were unhoused about issues with citations and issues with, as Todd and others said, no place to sleep, whether it's public property, private property, parklands. And so I felt like, well, how could I propose changes unless I had a better sense of the scope of the problem? And so what I did was first start by trying to identify the scope of the problem, which meant looking at data. And I could not have done this without my full-time law student intern who was with me all summer and fall. Talitha, just raise your hand. Talitha is a second year at University of Oregon Law School. But so anyway, what we did is we dove into the municipal court data, and I think if I say she spent hundreds of hours, that's not an exaggeration. So we got what we could from municipal court, we got what we could from EPD, public and public works, and a few other sources. So once we had a handle on the scope, then we also wanted to know, well, what's going on around the country? And so we looked at other cities that have made changes, whether it's a decision not to enforce and or ordinance changes to attempt to address this issue. When I say address this issue, there's no way we can fully address this issue no matter what we do. But ways to, as people kind of, the language is, ways to decriminalize, so people aren't getting cited and aren't getting criminal and civil violations merely for their status. So it's, we're status versus conduct. So that's what we looked at was, well, what are those status violations that seem to be most prevalent in municipal court? That's where we started. And so what we discoveed is sorry, the font's a little small. Hopefully what you can read on the screen, which is the 4 quality of life violations that we saw most often in municipal court are criminal trespass. I'm not using the proper code language, but criminal trespass 2, prohibited camping, park violations, open container. However, we also know that vehicle impoundments are an issue that disproportionately impacts the unhoused, as well as, of course, encampments are an issue that only impacts the unhoused. So that's the basis of this report. And I realize it's a slog. As Todd said, it's a lot to read. And actually, as Serena said to me last week when we were talking, she's like, some of it's really boring. And it's okay. It's okay. No, and I admit it.
I'm shocked that you said that. I know I said it. I'm shocked you told everyone.
Why? It's on me. So, no, I say that because it is a lot to read, and it is boring. It's dense. It's very dense. So I can't force anyone to read it, but if you just can't read the whole thing because it's making you fall asleep, I strongly urge you to read the executive summary, the key findings, and the recommendations. And if you read it in the electronic version, the good news is you can click. So you can say, well, wait, why is she making these recommendations about criminal trespass too? You can click, thanks to Heather Solanke, who embedded and made this report far more usable online. But you can click to the discussion of criminal trespass too. So you can understand the connection between the problem and the proposed solutions. Sorry, Serena.
It's okay, I forgive you.
All right. So, and I kind of already, so the data analysis, I spoke briefly about that, and I'll come back to key highlights. But so, you know, what does this report cover? If you haven't had the chance to look at it, this is really the big table of contents of the report. In addition to our own data, the data analysis we did in Eugene, and I might add, it's not just the scope in terms of the numbers of people impacted, it's also an attempt to estimate the costs. Because we can't lose sight of the fact that arguably it's a human rights violation what's happening to people who are unhoused, but it's also the financial cost on the city. It's a drain on city resources. So we tried to look at that as well. And of course, it's very incomplete based upon what we had access to. But we also looked at other cities because there have been studies of the financial costs in other cities. And then in addition to the financial costs, we looked at studies, as I said before, on decriminalization efforts in other cities. And then the other thing to keep in mind is the efforts that we have listed, and I should say, I forget what page it starts, but part 6 outlines that there's a chart on the list of other cities and what changes they've made to their ordinances. Thank you, page 33. So the other thing to keep in mind is there have been several successful lawsuits by people who are unhoused against cities. And when I say successful, either court rulings that have compelled cities to make changes and or settlement agreements where cities have agreed to make changes. So that is part 7, the list of lawsuits as well. But so that's everything we looked at. And then I should add national studies. If some of them, and they're all cited in the report. Some of them, the national studies are excellent. But so those are all the kind of bases for which the bases we use to make our recommendations. We weren't just making our recommendations out of thin air. And you'll see in the recommendations section that where other cities have made similar changes, we noted those other cities. So I'm going to try to go quickly with this because I want to leave most of the time for questions. But my question is what I have on the screen. Why is this relevant to Eugene? Why should we care? Well, I'm probably stating the obvious for many of you, but once again, I like to look at the data. So what we're talking about is the people who are unsheltered, completely unsheltered, and not in any form of transitional housing, because that count is part of the point-in-time count. But we're talking people who don't have shelter. And as you can see, it's well over half. I'm not good at doing math in my head, but probably 2/3 are unsheltered. And according to the point-in-time count, only 25% of those people who are unsheltered are in some kind of alternative to shelter, which means one of our existing programs in Eugene. Dusk to Dawn, Opportunity Village, community-supported shelters, rest stops. So that means we're left with, as you see, 1,218 people who have nowhere to go on any given day or night. And so I'm not going to get in, but so that's the picture we're talking about. We're talking about a large number of people who are completely unsheltered, and wherever they go, they are violating the law. So these are large numbers of people, and the municipal court data kind of speaks to that. And so once again, why does it matter? Well, I mean, we can debate whether or not it's a human rights violation. I would argue that, as you heard from Richard tonight, and as I'm sure you kind of have heard from whether you read newspaper articles or synopses of reports, that it is a huge barrier to housing and to employment, getting these citations. And so it really just is, it leads people into a kind of homelessness that makes it further to climb out of and transition to more stability. And the other thing, in addition to the direct employment and housing impact, there's also the psychological impact, the fear of getting a citation, and the decisions people make and compromise their safety just over that fear, as well as it breeds then mistrust of the police because of the fear of getting a citation because they're unhoused. And then, I mean, if you read the court cases, and arguably it's an equal protection violation of our Constitution, in addition to the 8th Amendment violation that's discussed in Boise, and in addition to the other bases for successful lawsuits have been 4th Amendment, illegal search and seizure with respect to encampment. So, but when you think about it, there's a disproportionate impact on a group of individuals, and the enforcement is selective. It's because of their status of being unhoused. And the other thing to keep in mind is many of the people who are unsheltered have a disability, and many are seniors. And some of what I've heard recently is that the elderly is the fastest growing population of unhoused, and that has a whole set of other issues to consider. So, and then just going back to the impact on our city. Cost of enforcement versus, that should say, cost of housing. And so I think everyone in this room has heard about studies that demonstrate the significant difference with housing versus the cost of someone being unhoused. And that is both medical costs as well as the enforcement of quality of life laws. And I defer to Chief Skinner on this, but I would argue that it's a really poor use of police resources by being the front line of enforcement, and then of course it's a diversion for more important safety issues. So I talked about that. So here I'm not going to read these data points, and in the report, part 2, I lay out key findings. I mean, you can glance at them as I'm talking, but and then also Appendix B is an analysis of the municipal court data. But as you can see, we're talking large numbers just for the 4 quality of life violations I've mentioned. And the other I think notable data point that is worth mentioning is that 25% of the court docket is on these 4 violations, and the vast majority of the people who are cited for these violations are people who are unhoused. So this is a huge part of who's revolving through municipal court. I will say, when I say municipal court, that encompasses community court. And in my Appendix B, there is a breakdown that shows the numbers diverted to community court. It's meaningful, but not significant enough to just say, okay, we're solving the problem by diverting some people to community court. So, more data. And the other thing to keep in mind is the outstanding fines that people have. And just the numbers of people who owe, as you can see, more than $1,000, more than $5,000 is significant. And then that just keeps accumulating, those costs keep accumulating once it goes to collections. So it's inconceivable to me how people can pay those fines. And that's not even counting the people who were under 1,000 that we didn't calculate. So in the interest of time, I am happy to have Fabio share these slides with all of you. What I did is I tried to break down what are the problems with each of the individual kind of quality of life violations, and then propose corresponding solutions. And it's a bit awkward because many of the solutions have to do with EPD policy, and with Chief Skinner here, I'd love to be able to go over them with him before I just propose them in a vacuum. But sorry, I need to go up. So prohibited camping. I think we hear the most about prohibited camping. But one thing to keep in mind with prohibited camping is, that's the one that doesn't include a potential criminal violation. Prohibited camping is only a fine. Now, only a fine, I don't want to make it sound like that's okay. I just want to point out that when we're talking about decriminalization, we are talking about more than just prohibited camping. We're talking about these other quality of life violations, because criminal trespass too is a misdemeanor. So criminal trespass too, subject to jail time. Park violation, jail time. Open container, jail time. So, and impoundment of vehicles, jail time. So that's why the scope of the problem is larger than prohibited camping. But so a few solutions that I'd like to highlight with prohibited camping, because they apply to the others as well, is, well, first with prohibited camping. Two, and this has been done in other cities, is limit the hours of enforcement. So other cities allow camping in public areas during evening hours. Those evening hours vary. And then the other thing is designate areas where it's permitted. So doesn't necessarily mean open it to every square inch of public property, but at least certain areas where it's allowed. Now, so the next thing is, and this applies across the board, is what other cities have done and attempted to do, and what is in kind of best practices literature is, instead of police being the front line or the first responder, is outreach workers as first responders. And certainly that's not something that the HRC alone can implement, and that requires resources. But in the end, having a paid cadre of outreach workers to respond rather than police to work through the services needed and connection to shelter is far less costly and obviously far less intimidating for the individual. And so that's true of all of them. So I will share this. I don't want to get in the weeds with each of these, but I'm going to skip to the very end. So thinking about the recommendations, there are some themes that I wrote down, and outreach workers is one that could alleviate much of this problem, and given viable resources. So as we've heard from so many people, give people another alternative, and until the city can provide another alternative, don't cite for status of being unhoused. The other thing to consider is how to deal with the existing fines, because it's just keeping people in a more precarious place. And then as a policy, either reduce the fine to a nominal amount, or as I wrote, alternative ways to pay. So not necessarily forcing people to pay with money. And then, I go into this in the report, but a huge percentage of the citations issued are then prosecuted. I would propose changing the kind of criteria that is the basis for deciding whether or not to prosecute. So fewer people then have hearings in municipal court, and then if they fail to appear, there could be a warrant out for their arrest. The other issue is forms of notice, and this sounds nitpicky, but with many of these, the notice is mailed, and no one is of course going to get that notice. And so it's, you know, and it's done in other contexts within the law, but email is done in corporate law and corporate governance. So I would propose even email, just other forms so people actually get the information. So that's really it, because I want to allow time for questions, and I went into more detail on the slides with the intent of sharing them with you so you have them.
Sure. Thank you so much. At this time, what we're going to do is we're going to take questions, but it's only for human rights commissioners. So if folks would like to ask questions, they may do so after we, for commissioners, we have about 20 minutes left for Q&A, so I'll start taking a stack. Who wants to start?
I just had a comment. So we talked about it a lot in the work group, and just hearing the individual stories from folks who are really impacted. And obviously I've been working with homelessness issues for the last 15 years. If you haven't had a chance to read this report, I didn't find it boring.
Look at you.
I will sit down and go through it with you if you want to. I think
Listen,
the work
I'm an audiobooks person, okay?
Melissa and
We're all different.
Lori have done amazing work on this, and there's a lot of impactful information in here. If you haven't read it yet, I would invite you to, I'd love there to be a different word for camping when you're homeless, because camping is a recreational sport, and people are not camping and looking for citations for fun when they're unhoused.
That's such a good point.
Other folks?
May I make a comment?
No, sir, you may not. It's only for human rights commissioners.
Thank you.
Questions from other commissioners?
Under recommendations, those outreach workers, do they exist? And who are they? And who funds them? And
Well, so
how
I
many
should
are
have-
there?
I should have mentioned, you know, some of this is connecting to the TAP report, because the efforts under TAP to develop more, to build our housing supply for people who are unhoused, and you know, there are the 10 recommendations that the city and county are working to implement. One of those recommendations is more outreach workers, and it's not specific to criminalization, but if that can be a role, or even then if that is expanded beyond what's contemplated in the TAP report, to have people other than police as the first responders. But I mean, that's just something that I thought about because of the connection to the TAC report. I didn't flesh out any kind of a budget model or numbers needed. It's just, to me, it's one way to help address decriminalization and make a serious dent in the problem.
I'll just have a quick follow-up question also that's about the community court. You're talking about expanding the geographical boundaries of it. Are you saying that it's overwhelmed and it needs more?
Well, so if someone else here is more of an expert on community court, please speak up. My understanding, or I do know this about community court, it's still a pilot project, and it has very narrow geographical boundaries within the downtown area. I want to say 8 to 12 blocks or something. And so, you know, and people debate how effective community court is. But if we operate on the assumption that community court is a better alternative to municipal court, because, I mean, I went one morning and observed, and the people who do show up, their citations are either reduced or forgiven, there's no potential risk of getting any kind of criminal sanction. And then they do have access to the services. They develop a work plan. I mean, I think I talked to one of the officers who was at community court, and what he said, one of the frustrating things they see is people try to follow their work plan, but they still can't get access to any kind of housing or shelter. So this cycle repeats itself. But so I'm not here to speak one way or another about community court, but it gives people access to services. It reduces the severity of the violation, but it's only for people who commit those violations in that very small geographic boundary.
One last question, really quick, which is in the administrative order 5817.07, and it's where it says require verbal notice prior to issuing a citation and allow a reasonable amount of time to move. Reasonable is ambiguous.
It is.
Can we sometime reach what does that mean? 2 hours, 1 hour, 6 hours, 12 hours?
That's something, well, I'd go for 12, but I mean, I mean, ideally, so, right, I know what you're, so ideally, give people a warning and then give them 24 hours, which if it's a park violation for camping, that is the protocol, is a 24-hour notice. But under that administrative order, which for everyone, he's talking about park violations. And so with park violations, a warning is not required in order to issue a violation of park rules. And a violation of park rules, it has the potential of both, it's a fine and or jail time. So it is rather severe. Here, I can go to it. This is the summary of the violation of park rules. The other thing is, the stakes are really high, because if someone gets one violation of park rules and then they're in the park again, they then can be given a restriction of use. And restriction of use banishes people from all parkland in Eugene for 1 month. And if they do it again, it's 3 months. And if they do it again, it's a year. And so, I guess I'll give my commentary. I feel like that's incredibly draconian when we have thousands of acres of parkland. And once again, hiding in the park is probably the easiest way to avoid violation. But that's a really long-winded answer to your question.
Amanda?
Oh, never mind.
Questions?
I can, if I may, I provide a little bit of context based on that, just to help answer your question. Not in all cases, but in most cases, the 24-hour notice and availability to move is granted, and that's by our policy. The 24 hours is given. Now, having said that, we have certain groups of individuals that have chosen to engage in behavior in camp and set up camps that we know that the 24 hours is not given, and that's purposeful for specific circumstances, but in most cases the 24 hours is granted. The community court piece, which is I think a really important piece to the solution, is specific to the downtown activity zone, which is a small area of downtown that you're referring to, and is no longer a pilot project, and is actually was folded into the community safety initiative, and has ongoing funding for that, and does have some funding to be able to expand that. We've noticed very early on that our recidivism rate is very, very successful in a community court setting for people that want to participate and engage and go through their work plan. And so we're actually looking at how we can expand that model and apply it to different areas of the city so that we can provide off-ramps for those people that have been able to be successful in the community court scenario. And so just a couple of pieces of information to kind of help with some of that. Thanks.
Well, one
partially, I just wanted to make a comment that I did read the executive summary, and I went through to see the scope of the report, and I wanted to thank you and everybody who was involved with it, because it's a really good report. A lot of really good, useful information, whether or not you have to dig deeper in different places, but the solutions. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around, is the ask to the Human Rights Commission, the main ask is that we bring this to the city council, hopefully with is that Serena?
Yeah.
Working on this directly.
Yeah, we want to basically endorse it. I mean, they worked with the work group, but it doesn't belong to the work group. And if we send the report on to the city council with our endorsement and request a work session, then it's in their court.
A joint work session or a work session?
I mean, we hadn't really talked about that. Would you want a joint work session?
I'm open. What I
think it would be helpful. I
Yeah,
mean, usually if there's a work session, they invite the expert or the person who brought the thing. So.
Yeah, I mean,
Are there any other questions?
I
I want to make sure we get to the questions first before we get into action pieces.
Process. At the end is fine.
Sure.
How's the process?
At the end, I can share.
Okay, that's what I wanted to talk about process, so I'm ready to go.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, many of you know this, but just in case and for folks in the audience, the process is that you all could endorse the report, right, as something you've all read. So that would be an important thing to talk about if you're ready to endorse it tonight because you've fully read it and are able to do that. If not, you might choose to endorse at a later date knowing that you should come really prepared to do that. The other thing that I'll flag for you is that it's counselors, you would be making a request of Counselor Semple to carry this as a work session request, and she would send a poll to her peers, and that's how it would potentially become a work session. And so in that request, you'd want to be clear if you're asking for a joint session or not, so that she could properly represent what you're hoping to speak to at the meeting. So just want to clarify all of that so you think about what motions you might need and how prepared you should be to completely take in the report and determine if you're ready to endorse.
Any other questions? Now I'd like to have a couple of my own. Do you want?
No, go ahead.
So first of all, thank you so much for embarking on this, and thank you to your legal intern. You have a full plate already, so the fact that you were able to produce this is incredible. And thank you for all the work that you and Oregon Law Center does. I've been a big fan of your work for a long time. And I know that the Oregon Law Center serves a large swath of community members all over the state. I guess my question more so is, so this report that you all worked on, is there, and I know in here, and like I said, I haven't had a chance to fully read it yet, but I was glancing through it and saw that there is precedent in other communities across the country that have tried to deal with reducing the negative impacts of homelessness in their community. I guess I'm just curious, and you, knowing that you mentioned that, right, that we alone are not going to fix it, that there are larger things at play, like stagnant wages, like unavailability of housing. How far could we realistically go? How much can we do as a city, right? Like, because I know that this stuff has a lot to do with Oregon State Legislature and the county, and then of course the feds, and right, there's all these things that are moving and need to move in place. I guess my question is to you is based on what you've seen and all the work you've put in, what is the number one thing that we as a city could do to alleviate the pressure, right? The incredible pressure that the city's feeling.
I mean, I think it goes back to, I think it was what Todd said, is we need more legal places for people to go. I mean, ideally housing, but we have to accept that housing is not going to happen overnight. I mean, it's a longer term endeavor, and I mean, just permanent supportive housing alone is so costly, and it's a 2-year timeline. So there needs to be interim solutions of shelter that, is still defined as homelessness. But people have to have somewhere to go. I mean, the fact that there's a waiting list, and I talk about this, I think, in my executive summary, but the fact that there's a waiting list at every, kind of alternative shelter location, dusk to dawn, community supported shelters, and the waiting list is a few months long. And so people don't even have an option to get in somewhere. I mean, I mentioned this in the executive summary. Terry McDonald wrote an op-ed back in October saying Dusk to Dawn was full in October with a wait list. I mean, that's just overwhelming as a city. So, so that's why this really does connect to the TAC implementation, because, and this was when the folks from Boston came and presented at various public forums. This was when I started thinking about doing this report, because I asked, I said, did you look at kind of the laws and the impact laws have? And the part of her response was, no, but that's an essential element, and that's kind of the low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
So, I don't know if they're...
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I want to do a quick time check. We've got about 5 minutes left, so at this point, unless someone has a pressing question for our guest, I'd like to discuss next steps.
I'm sorry. So one thing with these slides is, because what I tried to do, like I said, was really bullet point each of the problems with each violation, and then bullet point corresponding solutions. So in your deliberations, and just review and thinking about next steps, it might be helpful to look at that, and that's a lot less overwhelming than the 10 pages or so discussion in the report. And the other thing is, maybe I'm a little apologetic or defensive about the length of this report, but what I decided is I'd never seen in Eugene anything comprehensive. And so that's really why I decided to do this. A gift would be a bit ridiculous to say, but I felt like this was the best, using my kind of legal background and legal skills, this is what I could offer this city, that hopefully the city and our city attorney and the other powers that be can use this as a strong foundation to do then their own investigative work rather than starting from scratch. So that's really my hope with this report.
Thank you so much. Deliberations. Okay, let's start with Bonnie and then Serena.
I believe that it is important that the commission reads this report and endorses this report from what I've already read. So I just want to say that.
Serena.
Yeah. So I view this as a gift too. And when I told her that it was boring, it was in the context of, I'm not sure like we can expect everyone to read it, but it is the sort of legal wonky illustration of what anyone who's worked anywhere near this knows to be true. So it's kind of like, it's a gift. This is whether the city does its own research or whether they just endorse it and say, yeah, thank you for spending those hours to do this and putting it all in one place, because for me, it's like the anecdotes and things are more riveting to me than the numbers and things like that, but they tell the same story, that the bottom line, very simple thing is that unless we as a city have somewhere that they can go legally, it is absurd to be charging people and giving citations, especially when we cannot say that we are universally enforcing every single law everywhere. I mean, I play on a softball team at the park, and people have open containers every single week. We even have a song that brags about it. It goes, no, just kidding. But my point is that you know that song? It involves hiding alcohol when the cops go by, but no one hides it. Like literally, the difference is how people feel about it. It's not that the law is being broken more or so I get that the police are in a hard place in terms of public will and everything, but I think the best thing that we could help the city do is, yes, the TAC report has been endorsed and everyone wants to do it, but everyone's like, when's something going to happen? When can we see any relief of the pressure? And so to me, this is a gift. It's like, here's your chance to just say, hey, let's do a little tinkering, even as a stopgap measure. We're not saying change the laws forever, but just change it long enough until you've got a better solution. And that to me is common sense. You don't have to read 73 pages.
Other folks?
Well, I'm counting the hyperlinks. 50.
To say that, you know, this is comprehensive and it's awesome that somebody did this, and I thank you. And I just look forward to maybe something as comprehensive that's dealing with root causes. I'm not calling this symptoms because the symptoms are severe enough that they are, and I'm so glad that you have addressed them. But I really do believe that as a society, as a city, that we need to dig a little deeper and find out how we can care for one another in a little more comprehensive fashion, rather than just call the other person a non-criminal. Wow, what an accomplishment. You know, I think we ought to go beyond that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I'm not suggesting that these solutions are the main answer, but they're part of a solution that, when you think about layers.
Continuous.
Yeah.
Layered.
All right, folks, it is 6:40. I typically don't make motions, but I do have some ideas and maybe someone can make a motion. It's clear to me that this is a incredible report, and that a lot of time and effort and thought went into it. I also know that we as a commission are proud to present solutions and suggestions to the mayor and city council. And we're a solutions-oriented group. Sounds like Jen already gave us something that we could do, which is, as a commission, ask Councilor Semple to request a work session, in which we can potentially either do it with them or just have them discuss it. And then in the meantime, we as a commission, along with Oregon Law Center, can perhaps delve a little deeper and see if there's something we can actually produce for council to consider. That to me feels like it's a logical next step for us to do.
I would just say, first things first, we need to read this and discuss it and approve it, and then
I guess the hope was we would have read it by today. So, no, I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
that was, we put it in this report, we've
Yeah.
talked about it, and
Yeah.
so,
Do you have a motion for it?
I don't wanna do another motion, I always do it.
Well, can we do that one step at a time? Just,
Sure. You can do something
well, I
small,
don't-
you start small.
I don't want to start with failure. How many people have read it? Who's ready to make a decision?
I'm ready.
I'm going to read it from start to finish.
Do we have a,
We do.
so I would like to make a motion to endorse the report, step 1. Is anyone ready?
Endorse your report.
Well, if we know we endorse it, then we can make another motion later to make
Let's do it all. Can I make
You
a
can
friendly
make it.
amendment?
Go for it. I don't want to make motions about it.
Okay, so.
I would like someone to move.
It doesn't
I would
have a
like
second,
this
so
to
you're just making
consider
a motion.
this meeting.
I'm just making a motion. Can we get a second first?
I was second.
Okay, second, Ibrahim. I'd like to make a friendly amendment. So my amendment would be to endorse this report and recommend to Councilor Semple to start a work session to discuss the recommendations in this report to City Council. Do you accept that as a motion?
Yeah, well, that was what we came here to ask, exactly what you're saying.
So do you accept my friendly amendment?
Yes.
Do you have a second? All those in
Yes.
favor? Or, sorry, excuse me, more other places of discussion?
Well, I don't know if it would be proper to add something to that amendment or
Would you
not.
like to-
But just that there be, that it ensure that we all read it, because it will help us in all of our
Definitely.
efforts.
I don't think this has to be part of the motion.
Well,
But this,
Well,
listen to
evidently.
Bonnie, she said read it, make sure you.
Yeah, I'll
So we
hover
had a-
over each of you.
We had a first and a second.
There will be a quiz.
Again, just to quickly summarize, the motion is to endorse officially as the Human Rights Commission this report and recommend to Councilor Semple that, request to Councilor Semple that she put out a poll for a work session with council to discuss the recommendations in this report. All those in favor? Abstentions? Noes? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much. Okay, next we have.
It's finished. All right, so first person, I think I got these in the right order. First person is Jennifer Frenzer. Oh, and then followed by Majestic C3.
Hi. Hey everybody, for those of you who don't recognize me, I served on this commission from 2014 to 2017. And at that time, our chair was Ken Newbeck. And there's an agenda item on your agenda tonight about criminalization of the unhoused. And I just wanted to provide a little context about the paper that Lori wrote and Talika. And I want to explain to you something you may not know, because this happened before your commission. And when the Poverty and Homeless Board was created as the continuum of care provider, they were tasked with creating a 5-year strategic plan. And at that point in time, Ken and I were serving. And we went to several times presenting to the board, the Poverty and Homeless Board, that criminalization needed to be addressed in the strategic plan. And what occurred with that plan was they mentioned it in the executive summary, and their direction was, we believe the Human Rights Commission must address criminalization. This is who's going to steward the issue of criminalization. Therefore, I would like to, time has gone. I don't know if they've actually drafted or their new strategic plan because I think they're 5 years. But I just wanted to remind you that working in concert with the Poverty and Homeless Board and all the other agencies, but the onus is on this group to deal with criminalization. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Majestic, followed by Gabriel Scott.
Hello, Majestic C-Screen. I'm also speaking on the criminalization report and issue. And I've been on the Homelessness and Poverty work group, and I've been a minutes taker. And I need to apologize both to the work group and to the commission for the wording that I used in the report that was submitted and that is in your packet. I was a little rushed because of Fabio's different schedule, and in an effort to be polite and diplomatic, I think I ended up making the report in the minutes not as strong as the committee, the work group really intended. So I've emailed, I'm going to read you a new closing sentence to that paragraph about the motion that we passed, which I've emailed to our commissioners on the work group and to Fabio and to Lori. So the work group, a motion was passed unanimously to endorse the report and forward it to the Human Rights Commission. Then this is the new wording. Recommending that the commission endorse the report and requesting the commission to please direct their council liaison, Councilor Semple, to request a council work session to review the decriminalization report with a presentation from Lori Haber, and to seriously address and consider the recommendations contained in the report. That statement compared to what's in your packet is just a little more strong, and we want to say it in a respectful way, but we've been working on this for so long, and as Jennifer referred to, this has been an issue in front of us for like 10 years at least. And this is a time we really need the council to have a serious work session looking at those kind of recommendations for changing some of the city ordinances, because we really must decriminalize. Thanks.
Thank you. The next is Gabriel Scott, followed by Heather Selecki.
My name is Gabriel Scott. I'm a person who lives in Eugene, in a friendly neighborhood with my wife and kids. I'm here to address the Decriminalization of Homelessness report. I've been sort of waiting for this to come out for a while, just sort of watching it come together through a group called House Everyone, just meeting people looking for solutions to all kinds of issues related to homelessness. And had a chance to look at some of the data and was just really impressed with how solutions-oriented this information is, which is exciting because, you know, there's a lot more issues than solutions, and it's a lot easier to say something needs to be done than to do it, as you know. And this is a step towards doing some things, and so it's really exciting in that way. So really, I just wanted to commend that report to you. It's an important issue, and a lot of different people have been sort of watching this issue from different directions. From my perspective, as a person moving to town a few years ago with my kids, seeing there's an obvious problem with homelessness here in town. As an attorney, I'm in-house counsel at Cascadia Wildlands, so this isn't my direct area, but you know, as an attorney, I can you know, observe laws and how they're functioning. And criminalizing homelessness isn't even a thing that anyone advocates. That's not a real thing. So if there is criminalization of homelessness, you know, that's obviously a problem that needs to be fixed. I think anyone would agree with that. All kinds of reasons of judicial efficiency, all kinds of common ground with police and with budgeting concerns. Just all kinds of common ground to be had on this. So it's an awesome report, awesome solution-oriented information, and hope you guys can help carry it forward. And thank you for all of your work. You've got a really impressive and important agenda. So I apologize in advance that I have to cut out early. But thanks for all you do.
Thank you. All right, Heather Selecki, followed by Brian Michaels.
Hi, I'm Heather Selecki, and I just wanted to say I've been with the Homeless and Poverty Work Group for 4 years, and I strongly support the recommendation of having City Council have a work session on this very important issue, continuing to enforce penalties against people for performing life-sustaining activities on the street. All that's doing is perpetuating negative stereotypes and misunderstanding around homelessness and creating further barriers for people to get rehoused. So I ask that you move forward on this.
Thank you. So next is Brian Michaels, followed by Julie Lambert.
Hi there. I am Brian Michaels, and I'm here because of letters I sent you last week about an op-ed I wrote with Ibrahim here concerning police action against the Latino man who was ultimately killed. Just so you know, many months ago, I also wrote another piece in the Register Guard where I praised and indeed thanked the police for protecting our children when that man went into middle school with a loaded firearm. Man in middle school with loaded firearm, thank you so much for protecting us, for serving us, for putting yourself in danger. Man walking down the street, harming nobody, minding his own business, not so much. I came here tonight because I understand that as a result of the op-ed that we wrote, the police are going to give a de-escalation presentation here. And I mentioned in the letter I emailed to you folks about an instance where escalation was testified to by officers at a trial, that they were trained to escalate, that it was okay as long as you're not the lead officer. I gave you a caption attached to that letter of the trial that happened. If you want to get that transcript and you now have the caption, obviously we as the plaintiff put our case on first, the city went next. It gives you an idea of when these officers testified. And of course, if you want to contact me in any manner, shape, or form to assist you in getting these transcripts, I would be very happy to assist you in any way I can. And just as a closing remark, as we talk about this man walking the street, minding his own business, being in a place where he's not supposed to be, and we talk about de-escalation, I would insist, or at least propose to you, that by grabbing this man, that's de-escalation. Not only is it an escalation, it's the ignition of a violent event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see, I have Julie Lambert, followed by Richard Self.
Thank you all. Thank you all. This is great. I'm here to support Lori's extensive work that she's done on the criminalization of homelessness. And I agree with previous speakers that we do need a city council work group that addresses this issue. Because criminalization is not a deterrent. I can speak from personal experience. I've been part of the Poverty and Homelessness Board work group for 3 to 5 years, and part of that I was homeless. And during that time, I got a ticket for $1,000. Now, I think you can understand how ludicrous that is. If a person had $1,000, they wouldn't be by the side of the road. And I simply had to pack up my things and move to a different place. Getting the $1,000 ticket wasn't a deterrent for me. So I would like to see the Human Rights Commission help us work towards decriminalization, because criminalizing homelessness is actually, it's criminalizing existence for a lot of people that are out there right now. They don't want to be out there. That's not their first choice. For the majority of them. And we have kids. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Let's see, I have Richard Self, followed by Tom Peck.
Thank you, panel, for this opportunity to speak. I was asked to speak on this, and I, in my early days of being homeless, almost a decade ago, received 2 trespassing tickets for trying to sleep at the Washington Jefferson Park before the chief came along. And they told them $100 a piece, which of course, being homeless, I couldn't pay. So they went to collections, and they are still there. They totaled, last I checked, about $1,600, and they helped ruin my credit score, making finding housing almost impossible, even with a Section 8 voucher at the time. And this was some 2 years ago, and this still affected me. And it was, I can only tell people, it was only by the grace of God that I did find somebody that didn't make credit score and so forth and so on such a high priority as part of the screening process. And I have been housed for 2 years and paying my fair share, and I still have these outstanding tickets with collections affecting my credit score to this day with PCS. And all I was doing was sleeping on some cardboard here in Washington Jefferson Park, because even 10 years ago, there was nowhere to go. I thank you for looking at this in the criminalization report, and I endorse doing what we can to make these ordinances, which violate federal statute of both the Boise and Levon decisions, those are laws too, and violating the law is lawlessness, no matter how you slice it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, next we have Tom Peck.
Folks, thank you for
having me. I'm Tom Peck. Excuse me, fortunately housed. Live in the Friendly District. I'm on the Friendly Neighborhood Board. I'm active in House Everyone, and from being active, I've just seen how people who otherwise they would have a job, they would have a family, have had hard times, and then become criminalized. And it's just, to me, it's appalling. I've read Lori Hubbard's report, most of it. It's a super well-documented report with facts that you can't ignore. I think it's time to take action now to decriminalize these poor people who are out in the streets. And I certainly am going to raise this in our neighborhood and work with other neighborhood leaders to educate people, because there are forces locally and nationally who want to lock up the unhoused people in detention, these FEMA camps and other places. And I think we need to act swiftly to find them housing. We will save money by decriminalizing and providing housing and services for the unhoused. So I just strongly support her report. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that ends public comments.
I signed up.
I don't know that I have a sheet for you. What was your name?
Todd Boyle is his name. Oh, there it is. No, that was the wrong sheet, Todd.
Okay, if you want to go ahead and then you could fill it out later, that would be fine.
I came here about a year ago and I expressed my disappointment in the Human Rights Commission for not taking seriously the right of people to have some space. So I really love this report, but it is a lot of information, a lot of detailed information. But really where the problem lies is somewhere in the sentiment of the people in Eugene against the homeless and against the idea of providing space for the homeless. I was homeless in the 1970s, and we marveled at the comprehensiveness of the laws that you couldn't sleep in this sidewalk, you couldn't sleep in this zoo, you couldn't sleep in any of the private property, you couldn't sleep in the public lands, you couldn't sleep in the park. And so we hid, and it's still the same today. I want to remind all homeowners that all of our home titles are fake. They were invented beginning in 1843 by little committees who created this Oregon Territory Provisional Government and granted themselves 1 square mile each. Then the Congress came by and the Donation Land Claims Act and endorsed their giving themselves 1 square mile each. And to this day, that's where these checkerboards came from. And so I've been asking physicists and mathematicians if it's possible for someone to exist and have their human rights to life without having a place, geographical coordinates, Cartesian space, and none of it, they're baffled, any way that humans can live without having space somewhere. That's called a human right. That's called the human right. So I want action on this. I want the city to suspend and have a moratorium on these quality of life issues, whatever they are, ticketing people for sleeping, until there is space where they're allowed to go. There isn't space. And until that time, I want the city to let them sleep in Alton Baker Park or any public space until they come up with an answer where those people are supposed to be allowed to live. And I want more militancy out of the Human Rights Commission. Where's the militancy going to come from? It's not going to come from the Real Estate Commission or whatever these other commissions around here. So, thanks for.
Thank you for public comments. I will turn over.